Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable some people become when their birthday is mentioned? Not annoyed, not angry, just distant. They smile politely, change the topic, or say, "It's just another day," as if the date carries no emotional weight at all. As a clinician, this is something I've seen again and again, and I want to slow this moment down because what most people assume about birthdays is often very wrong. We're taught that birthdays are about joy, celebration, feeling special. So when someone treats their birthday like a normal day, we rush to label it. They're depressed, they're cold, they don't value themselves. But psychology is rarely that simple. In my consultation room, when people talk about birthdays they don't celebrate, I'm not listening for the event. I'm listening for the nervous system behind it. Because birthdays aren't just social rituals. They're emotional mirrors. They reflect how a person has learned to relate to attention, expectation, and disappointment. For some, birthdays stopped being safe a long time ago. Imagine being young and waiting all day for someone to remember. A call that never comes. A message that arrives too late. A small hope that quietly collapses. When this happens repeatedly, the brain adapts, not emotionally, biologically. Psychology calls this learned helplessness, but I prefer to explain it more gently. It's the moment the nervous system says, expecting hurts more than not expecting. So the child grows into an adult who no longer anticipates, not because they don't care, but because caring once cost them too much. By adulthood, the birthday loses its emotional charge. The person doesn't announce it, doesn't plan, doesn't wait. And from the outside, it looks like indifference. But inside, it's often self-protection. What most people don't realize is that this adaptation is intelligent. It reduces emotional spikes. It prevents disappointment. It keeps the system regulated. And if this feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. Nothing about this response means something is wrong with you. It means your brain learned how to survive emotional unpredictability. Birthdays, in this case, aren't avoided because they're meaningless. They're avoided because they once carried too much meaning without enough safety. And this is only one pathway. There are others, quieter, deeper, and often misunderstood, that shape why some people let their birthday pass like any other day. Some people don't stop celebrating their birthday because of pain. They stop because life slowly teaches them to disappear from their own calendar. I want you to sit with that idea for a moment. In my practice, I often meet adults who are constantly carrying responsibility, work, family, emotional labor. They are the ones others rely on. And somewhere along the way, their own needs become optional. Their birthday arrives quietly, almost apologetically. No anticipation, no pause. Just another obligation squeezed between deadlines and expectations. This isn't forgetfulness. It's cognitive overload. Neuroscience shows us that when the brain is under chronic stress, it prioritizes survival tasks over symbolic meaning. Important dates lose their emotional signal because the system is busy staying afloat. So the birthday doesn't feel special. Not because it isn't, but because the mind no longer has space to hold it. What concerns me clinically isn't that these individuals don't celebrate. It's that they don't stop. They move through the day exactly as they do every other day. Productive, efficient, functional, but never reflective. And reflection is where identity lives. When a person never pauses to mark their own existence, something subtle happens over time. They start to feel interchangeable, replaceable, invisible, even to themselves. What most people don't realize is that this pattern often comes from early conditioning, being praised for doing, not being, valued for contribution, not presence. So celebration feels unnecessary, even indulgent. As a female clinician, I want to say this gently but clearly. Being needed is not the same as being seen. And many people confuse the two for years. They tell themselves, I don't need attention, when what they really mean is, I've learned to survive without it. The nervous system adapts beautifully to this. It flattens emotional highs. It reduces desire. It keeps things manageable. But here's the part no one warns you about. When joy becomes optional, rest eventually does too. And birthdays are often the first thing to go, not out of strength, but out of exhaustion. If this resonates, I don't want you to judge yourself. This isn't failure. It's a signal that your system has been carrying more than it was meant to carry alone. And as we move forward, we'll talk about another reason birthdays lose meaning. One that has nothing to do with stress and everything to do with how safe it feels to be seen. There's another reason birthdays quietly disappear, and this one is deeply relational. It happens when someone gives more emotional presence than they receive. In my work, I often meet people who are reliable in ways no one talks about. They remember other people's dates. They show up. They check in. They carry emotional continuity for everyone around them. And yet, when their own birthday comes, the silence feels louder. At first, they excuse it. People are busy. Life is hectic. It's not personal. But the nervous system doesn't process excuses. It processes patterns. When emotional effort flows consistently in one direction, the body eventually recalibrates. Not out of resentment, but out of self-preservation. So expectations shrink. The person stops reminding others, stops planning, stops hoping. From the outside, it looks like maturity. I don't make a big deal out of things, but what I hear clinically is something more tender. I don't want to feel forgotten again. There's a quiet grief that comes with realizing you are dependable, but not deeply remembered. Most adults don't name that grief. They adapt around it. And adaptation often looks like emotional independence. Birthdays become optional because wanting acknowledgement started to feel vulnerable without guarantee. As a clinician, I want to pause here because this is important. Avoiding disappointment is not the same as not needing connection. Many people who minimize their birthday still long to be held in someone's mind. They've just learned not to ask for it. And when the day passes without recognition, the brain fills in the meaning automatically, not consciously, physiologically. The body registers. I don't take up much space. Over time, this realization doesn't always hurt sharply. Sometimes it numbs. And numbness is not absence of feeling. It's protection from overload. So when someone says, I don't really care about my birthday anymore, what they may be saying underneath is, I've learned how to protect myself from feeling invisible. If this lands close to home, I want you to hear this with care. Your need for recognition is not childish. It's human. And learning to minimize that need doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you quieter. Some people don't avoid birthdays because they feel forgotten. They avoid them because attention itself feels uncomfortable. And this is one of the most misunderstood patterns I see. In my consultations, people often tell me, I've never liked being the center of attention, as if that preference appeared randomly. It didn't. Our relationship with attention is formed early, long before we can explain it. If, as a child, being noticed came with pressure to behave, to perform, to impress, then visibility never felt relaxing. It felt monitored. So even positive attention activated the nervous system instead of soothing it. Neuroscience shows us that when early attention is conditional, the brain links being seen with evaluation, not warmth, not safety. So when a birthday arrives, something subtle happens. The body tightens. There's an unspoken question running underneath the smile. Am I reacting correctly? Am I being grateful enough? Am I doing this right? And that internal self-monitoring makes celebration exhausting. So the mind finds a solution. It removes the spotlight. Treat the birthday like any other day. Stay busy. Stay ordinary. Ordinary feels safe. As a female clinician, I want to be very clear about something here. This is not about rejecting love. It's about not trusting what happens when love looks at you too closely. Many of these individuals are deeply caring. They love celebrating others. They just don't want that intensity turned inward. And over time, this pattern extends beyond birthdays. Achievements are downplayed. Compliments are deflected. Milestones are minimized. Not because they lack pride, but because being seen still activates old tension in the body. If this resonates, I want you to hear this gently. Your discomfort with attention doesn't mean you're ungrateful or cold. It means your system learned to stay alert when eyes were on you. That adaptation once kept you emotionally safe. But adulthood offers a choice. We can learn to receive attention without bracing for judgment. We can let celebration be warm instead of overwhelming. And sometimes that starts by understanding why a simple birthday never felt simple in the first place. We'll explore what happens when birthdays lose meaning after loss, and why flattening the day can be an act of quiet survival. There's a shift I often see after loss, and it changes how time itself is felt. A death, a separation, a relationship that once anchored a sense of belonging. After something like this, birthdays don't arrive with excitement. They arrive with weight. In my practice, people rarely say, "My birthday makes me sad." What they say instead is, "I just don't want to deal with it." And that tells me a lot. The brain doesn't experience time emotionally in isolation. It measures it through connection. So when someone important is no longer there to witness your growing older, the nervous system notices the absence before the mind names it. A missing call. A silence where a voice used to be. And the body responds by dulling the day. Not out of denial, out of protection. Flattening the birthday reduces emotional contrast. It keeps grief from flaring unexpectedly. Neuroscience shows us that grief alters temporal processing. The future feels less inviting. Milestones feel less meaningful. So the system chooses neutrality. No anticipation, no reflection, no emotional inventory, just move through the day. As a female clinician, I want to say something important here. This is not emotional weakness. It's pacing. The nervous system regulates grief by controlling exposure, just like it does with pain. For many people, birthdays become too concentrated, a reminder of who isn't there, what has changed, what can't be shared anymore. So they soften the day until it feels manageable. What often surprises others is that these same individuals may find deep comfort in small, ordinary moments. A familiar routine, a quiet evening, a sense of steadiness. They haven't lost their capacity for meaning. They've redistributed it. If someone you know doesn't celebrate their birthday after loss, the kindest response isn't pressure or encouragement. It's respect. And if this is your experience, I want you to hear this without shame. There is no correct timeline for returning to celebration. One day, the date may feel lighter, or it may remain quiet, but gentle. Both are healthy outcomes. We'll look at a group of people who don't avoid birthdays because of pain or grief, but because their relationship with time, reward, and meaning has fundamentally changed. Some people stop celebrating birthdays not because something went wrong, but because something shifted. Their relationship with time matures. In therapy, I often hear statements like, "Age doesn't mean what it used to," or "I stopped counting years," and when I hear this, I don't hear detachment. I hear reorientation. Early in life, meaning is structured around milestones, grades, achievements, ages. These markers give the brain a sense of progress. But after periods of stress, burnout, or existential questioning, the nervous system often prioritizes regulation over stimulation. From a neurological perspective, this reflects a subtle recalibration of reward systems. Dopamine thrives on anticipation and novelty. Celebrations feed that system. But when someone has lived through prolonged pressure or emotional volatility, the brain often reduces its appetite for emotional highs, not as a deficit, as a boundary. The system says, I prefer steadiness to spikes, so birthdays lose their emotional pull, not because joy is unwelcome, but because exaggerated joy feels dysregulating. These individuals often find satisfaction in quieter ways. Consistency, purposeful work, a sense of internal alignment. They don't need an event to authorize happiness. This is closely related to what psychology calls an internal locus of control. A belief that well-being comes from inner coherence rather than external validation. However, I want to offer a gentle clinical caution here. When everything becomes just another day, life can slowly lose texture if reflection disappears entirely. Milestones, used thoughtfully, help the brain integrate time and identity. They allow meaning-making. So the healthiest version of this mindset isn't avoidance, it's balance. Not celebration for show, but acknowledgement for self. A quiet pause. A personal ritual. A moment of recognition. Because when birthdays are treated as nothing at all, some people unconsciously stop honoring themselves. And that isn't emotional independence. It's invisibility turned inward. We'll bring these patterns together and talk about what birthdays really reveal about how we relate to ourselves. By the time someone reaches this stage, their relationship with birthdays has very little to do with celebration. It has everything to do with self-recognition. In my years as a clinician, I've learned that birthdays act like emotional mirrors. They reflect how a person allows themselves to exist in time. Do they pause, or do they rush past? Do they acknowledge survival, or minimize it? Do they allow themselves to be seen, even privately? People who treat their birthday like a normal day are often misunderstood as distant or detached, but many of them are deeply reflective. They've lived long enough to know that attention is temporary, that noise fades, that validation doesn't sustain. So they stop orienting their sense of worth around moments that require an audience. Instead, they learn to sit with themselves. And that can be uncomfortable. Silence brings questions celebration can distract us from. Questions about direction, about meaning, about whether life feels aligned. This is why birthdays can feel heavy, even when life appears stable. A birthday asks one quiet question: are you living in a way that feels true to you? Not everyone is ready to answer that aloud, so they keep the day ordinary, not because it lacks meaning, but because it holds too much. What I want to emphasize, especially as a female clinician, is this. This way of relating to birthdays is not a flaw. It's not emotional deficiency. It's a response shaped by experience, responsibility, loss, and growth. The only time it becomes a concern is when neutrality turns into avoidance. When years pass without reflection. When time moves forward but the inner narrative stays paused. Birthdays don't need to be joyful or sad to be healthy. They need to be acknowledged. That acknowledgement can be private. Quiet. Gentle. A moment to say, this is where I am. This is what I've survived. This is what still matters. Whether that happens alone or with others is secondary. So if you recognize yourself in this, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need to celebrate louder. You don't need to perform happiness. You only need to remain honest with yourself. Because a life that is never paused, never acknowledged, and never reflected on can quietly pass unnoticed, even by the person living it. And psychologically speaking, that is the only real loss.